Welcome to the fourth week of our government course. This week we're going to focus on the first section of the Constitution. Last week we talked about what led up to the development of that great document. And we're going to talk about Article 1 today, if you're interested. And Article 1 deals specifically with Congress. Congress, of course, is the main lawmaking body. Congress over the years has developed its own rules as to how it operates, but there are some things that they did not have to develop on their own. They were constitutionally mandated, and they still operate under those principles today. We're going to talk, again, just broadly about what Congress is, what they do, and how that fits into our government even today. And we're also going to ask a question that I want you to answer when we get to class on Monday. This is kind of a discussion question. Think about term limits. That is to say, the proposal where a member of Congress could only serve a certain number of years and then they could not run for re-election. We already have term limits with the president. By the constitutional amendment, the president could only serve 8 years, 2 terms, and right now there is no restriction on how long a member of Congress can serve. So as we go on this, keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but that's going to be kind of our little group discussion question on Monday. Article 1 is the first main section of the Constitution right after the preamble that we talked about last week. It's the longest article of the Constitution, and it's for a reason. It talks about what the founders saw as the most important and what should be the most powerful part of government, the Congress. That is to say, the main legislative body. Congress writes the law. They make the law. They pass the law. They do not enforce the law. They do not carry out the law. They do not interpret the law. Again, they write law. That is the main duty of Congress. We in the United States have what's called a bicameral legislature, and that means we have 2 houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. This picture right here will give you a decent idea of some of the differences in the duties of the respective houses. You'll see here, again, these are broad differences. The House, the rules are formal, detailed, comprehensive. In the Senate, it's less like that. House members tend to be specialists in a particular policy. House members serve on only 1 or 2 standing committees, and we'll discuss committees in a few minutes. And the House is a majority-based legislature. In the Senate, you have less majority, more basically, in some cases, supermajority. And the filibuster, which we'll talk about in a second, and of course the filibuster is something that has been very much in the news lately. The presence of the bicameral legislature, the House and the Senate, kind of owes itself to the flavor of the time. Remember, British Parliament had the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and it was a good model. One model was basically centered on the people. The other was focused on the states. And right now, out of the 50 states in the Union, all but 1 have what we call a bicameral legislature. Bonus points if you can name the one holdout. Nebraska. Not sure why they haven't gone to the bicameral legislature, but they have not. Another thing that happens with the bicameral legislature, House and Senate, is that we have another system of checks and balances. They help check each other. According to the Constitution, only the House can pass or originate spending bills. Now, the Senate has other powers that are not enjoyed by the House. So again, you've got these 2 houses not competing with each other, but again, it's set up to where they can serve as a check, again, where no one gets too much power. The House of Representatives is the only element of our national government that people elect directly in the Constitution. In the original Constitution, that's the case. It's not the case now. We'll get to that in a second. To serve as a member of the House, you have to be 25 years old. You have to have been a citizen for 7 years. That doesn't eliminate too awful many people. You also have to be a resident of the state that you are representing. But you don't necessarily have to be a representative of the district. This map right here shows the 5th District of Virginia. It's right here in the middle. As you can see, it is doggone huge. It's one of the district is larger than the state of New Jersey. And it's got about 700,000 people in it, which is standard for a congressional district. The reason it's so big is because so many of these areas are sparsely populated. We live in one of the most densely populated parts of the district, down here in Danville. The others up here in the middle of the state in Charlottesville. Otherwise, it's a very, very rural district. Now, in theory, someone from outside of the geographical boundaries of this district could run for the 5th District congressional seat, but it would be very hard to convince district voters if you come from another part of Virginia that you should represent us in the House. So, yeah, technically you don't have to be, but you have to be. A congressman, that is a member of the House, not to be confused with a senator in the Senate, a member of the House can only serve for 2 years. So every 2 years we reshuffle the deck again, and everyone's up for re-election. And it happens in even-numbered years. Now, the apportionment of House seats, that is to say, the number that each state gets, is entirely dependent upon population. Again, House of Commons, House of Lords, House of Representatives, Senate. The people, the states. This is the people. And because of that, the population is the apportionment is directly determined by population. Now, this map right here shows you how many congressional seats each state has. You'll notice several that have only 1 seat. Several have only 2, but there's some, like, California is the biggest with 53, Texas the next, then New York and Florida with 27, and that, of course, plays into the Electoral College, which we'll talk about a little later. Originally, the idea was to have representatives in the House representing about 30,000 people. At the time of the Constitution, that's about right. But the framers knew that the population was not going to stay the same forever. So today, the average House district has about 700,000 people. So, yeah, if the House still followed the original standard of 1 congressman for every 30,000 people, we would have 10,000 members of Congress. You think it's unwieldy now? Wow. That's because, again, the population of the United States has gone up exponentially since 1787. Now, the first Congress that was ever seated had 65 members in it. By 1912, they had grown to 435. Well, this was about the point that everyone said, that's a lot of people. And how do you have an honest debate or a productive debate with 435 people talking? Well, you don't. And so after 1912, the Congress passed what's called the Reapportionment Act, which sets the permanent size of the House of Representatives at what it was currently at the time, 435 people. Now, you'll notice there was nothing in the Constitution that said the House must be this size. No, that was one of the places where the framers left things wide open for us to adjust as the times went along. And as the time went on, we basically decided 435 is fine. We don't need any more than that. Then we get into, and this is something that's going to be very interesting to tell you about. It's called redistricting. This right here, again, is that map of the 5th Congressional District I was telling you about. And each of these districts is drawn in the state of Virginia. This is always handled with the state legislature, in our case, the Virginia General Assembly. And geographic boundaries are drawn to place people in this district, District 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in Virginia all the way to district number 11. Redistricting by constitutional decree happens every 10 years. Because what happens every 10 years, also according to the Constitution? The U.S. Census. First census was in 1790, and of course we are doing a census this year, being a year ending in 2020. So yes, we're going to have a census this year. After the official head count in 2021, state legislatures, all 50 of them, are going to find out how many seats of Congress they have. Now, most of the time, there's very little change. A state might pick up one or two, another might lose one or two. Still going to be 435, but it depends upon how the population is distributed throughout the U.S. Now, every 10 years in state legislatures, there is a big, big battle over redistricting. I'm going to show you something that will demonstrate to you the concept of what we call gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is a word after a Massachusetts politician who basically drew committees to favor him and his cronies. Let's take a look at what this looks like in practice, and you'll see what we're talking about. This is one of those instances where a visual example is much, much better. All right, in this first picture, we see a drawing that has 13 elephants representing the Republican Party and 13 Democrats representing the Democratic Party. So if you were to look at this, let's call this, state, A or whatever. If you looked at this, you would say, boy, that state's got about half Democrats and half Republicans. Well, let's say in that state, Republicans are in charge of drawing the congressional districts. District number 1, upper left, 3 Republicans for every 2 Democrats. District number 2, 3 Republicans for every 2 Democrats. Same with District 3, same with District 4, same with District 5. District 6 packs in 5 Democrats. So of the 6 districts that are represented here, 5 of them are Republican majority districts. Just because you're a Republican doesn't mean you're automatically going to vote for a Republican every time. You're free to vote for whomever. But these are broad tendencies. And again, in this example, 5 of the 6 districts have been drawn to favor Republicans, even though in that state it's about a 50-50 split. A fair redistricting would come up with 3 Republican majority districts and 2 Democrat, or 3 Democrat majority districts, but it doesn't. Here's another example of gerrymandering. And this shows you, the title of this little meme here is a little misleading. It's not stealing, but it is disingenuous. Out of 50 imaginary precincts, 60% are blue Democrats, 40% are red Republicans. You can draw it one way here in the middle and have it to where all the districts are Democratic majority. These are the ones in the middle. The far right example shows how the districts can be drawn up to reflect more Republican districts. Again, just because you're a Democrat doesn't mean you have to vote for a Democrat and vice versa. But this is one of the ways that gerrymandering can work. And sometimes you'll see these districts with weird geographic boundaries that go up interstates and all. Not supposed to do that, but you see the advantage that this can have. I had a longtime state senator from Virginia tell me that the most partisan bickering process in Richmond, our state capital, is redistricting. It is brutal. Now, in Virginia this fall, we are going to vote on a state constitutional amendment that would set up an independent commission to draw these lines. Right now, it's whoever the party in power is. And so we're going to vote on that this fall to see if we want to move this duty over to an independent group. They've already done it in Iowa and a few other states. One thing that we've done to try to prevent gerrymandering is to come up with what's called the compact and contiguous requirements. According to federal law now, a district has to be as compact as possible, and it has to be contiguous. That is to say, the boundaries have to be about as close together as they can be and not have, something flowing up here. The 1965 Voting Rights Act also added another requirement to make sure that districts do not dilute minority votes. Anyway, hopefully you can see that gerrymandering is one of the unfortunate outcomes of a truly representative body. Again, this is brutal. They play for keeps. Now, let's talk about the Senate, the so-called upper chamber. It's very simple. Senators we have 2 senators from each state. 50 states times 2, that's 100 senators. Senator has to be at least 30 years old. They have to have been a U.S. citizen for 9 years. Again, slightly more strict requirements than the House, but not that much more. In the original Constitution, we didn't vote for our senators. Right now in Virginia, our senators are Mark Warner and Tim Kaine. They were both elected by the people. When we started out with this in the Constitution, state legislatures picked that state's senators. So the Virginia General Assembly in the years past chose Virginia senators. At the time, this was seen as sort of an inducement to get some of these reluctant states to adopt the Constitution. They were worried about states losing a lot of authority. So this was put in to help the states' right supporters to see that this is a document that was going to maintain state powers to some degree. Over time, we have sort of grown out of that and into the idea of democracy. Again, remember democracy. I vote, you vote, we all vote on everything. And have applied it to the Senate. And so, as the years went by, more and more states began to push away from this. And by 1912, we basically adopted 29 of the states by 1912 that adopted popular election of senators. And in 1914, the U.S. Congress passed the law, a constitutional amendment, I should say, that guaranteed that senators were chosen by the people and not by state legislatures. Now, obviously, this gives state legislatures a whole lot less power in the federal government. And if you're a states' rights aficionado, you don't like that. We have grown up, though, in a country where senators are directly elected. We know no other way. But at the time of this, again, Constitution wanted the states to choose the representatives in the Senate. Again, Senate's for the states, represents the states, the House represents the people. The Senate is given a few more powers than the House. Again, just pure mathematics. The Senate has 100 members, House has 435. Yeah, the Senate's a little bit more prestigious. The average senator has more authority than the average House member. Also, the Constitution gives additional powers to the Senate that they do not give the House. They have a very special check and balance role with the federal government. The president can propose a peace treaty with a foreign nation, but it has to be ratified by the Senate before it's official. And that has to be 2/3 ratification. Again, another check and balance. President can't go off and do his foreign policy like he wants. He has to have the backing of the Senate for it to be legal. As a matter of fact, we never signed the peace treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, that ended World War I. Senate didn't agree with it because part of the peace treaty was to form the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations, and a lot of the Republican senators at the time wanted to have nothing to do with it. So we negotiated as a country our own separate peace with the World War I Axis powers and adopted it. Also, and this is something we are hearing about an awful lot these days, the Senate has a role in confirming or rejecting the president's nominees to cabinet positions and, ding, 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 the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in particular has become one of the more controversial aspects of the Senate's advice and consent role. And we have had a lot of constitutional questions the past few years about the proper use of this power by the Senate. In 2016, President Barack Obama was in the last year of the second term of this presidency when Justice Antonin Scalia passed away in, I think, February of that year. As the Constitution requires, President Obama made a nomination, a gentleman named Merrick Garland. Obama was a Democrat. The Senate was controlled by Republicans at the time. What was happening later in 2016? We had a presidential election coming up. The Senate, the Republican-controlled Senate, basically took a gamble. They did not take any action on Merrick Garland's nomination. They were hoping that a Republican would win the 2016 election then a Republican president, along with this friendly Republican Senate, could appoint someone that they probably liked better. The gambit worked. Of course, Trump won in 2016, and the President Trump at that point nominated someone that the Republican Senate liked. It's crass politics. It is constitutional. This is the downside of the Constitution. It's not pretty, but it is necessary. Another thing we settled through trial and error over the years is whether the president can remove someone, like in a cabinet position, Secretary of Energy, whatever, that's been also approved by the Senate. Again, the Secretary of Energy, before he takes over that job, he or she, they have to be approved by the Senate. What if a year down the road the president thinks the guy's doing a terrible job and he wants to get rid of him? Does he also need the Senate's permission since the Senate helped confirm him? Our courts say no, that's not the case. And so, again, that is a check that the Senate has on the president, but a check that only goes so far. In the next sub-lesson, we kind of look at the sessions of Congress, and I'm not going to require you to remember too much about this, just simply to note that the Constitution gave Congress the right to legislate elections except on the subject of the place where senators are chosen. Again, the Constitution strictly requires Congress to meet only once a year. In actuality, they have several sessions during the course of a year. They take 2, 3, 4 week vacations from time to time. The first Congress, of course, convened in 1789. Used to be that a congressman was elected, say, in November, but they would not begin serving until the next summer. Well, in 1933, we passed the 20th Amendment to the Constitution, which called for the inauguration of the president on January 20th of the following year, and the seating of a new Congress on January 3rd. So there's no need to wait. Another significant change, this is important. Congress used to meet only for a few months out of the year, maybe, for the first 100 or so years of the country. Then came the Civil War, then came other things, and Congress stayed around a little longer, a little longer, a little longer. And today, if you are a member of Congress, you have a home in Washington, D.C. You back home in Nebraska or California as well, but you have a home in D.C. because most of your hours are spent in Washington because most of the time Congress is in session. The founders originally saw this as a public service. Serving in Congress was something you did for your country, and they did not envision anyone making a career out of it. Because we have no term limits, lots of senators have. The gentleman running for president, Democratic nominee Joe Biden, was in the Senate for 40 years. We have 3 other members of the Senate right now that have served more than 40 years. There are several members of the House that have served 30, 40 years. So the idea at first with the Constitution was that it would be a citizen legislature. That is to say, everybody goes to Congress, they pass laws or whatever, then they go back and live under the laws they create. Today, that's less of a thing because, again, they're spending most of their time in the nation's capital and quite often not dealing with the laws, the very laws that they pass. A couple of other things about Congress in terms of how they function. The House and Senate each have broad sets of rules for how they do their business. There's no constitutional requirement that says the House must do it this way or the Senate must do it that way. They each have, as a body, a whole lot of latitude, I should say, to determine how they're going to do things. The only thing Constitution requires in terms of operational stuff is the keeping of a congressional record. That is to say, an official document that shows everything that's entered into record in Congress, floor sessions or whatever. And the congressional record is a constitutional requirement. We remember, of course, C-SPAN is still going today. Back in 1979, they started broadcasting live House sessions and Senate sessions. They held out for a while. Senate really didn't start till 86, I believe. One of the things that C-SPAN showed the country about Congress was most of the time, even when Congress is in session, they're not all sitting in the big congressional chambers voting on things, making fiery speeches with everyone on top of everyone else. No. Most of the time, even when the House or Senate is in session, the building is more or less empty. Just a few people hanging around. Votes are recorded electronically, of course, and there's cloakrooms all around. So yeah, in terms of, when we see, like at the State of the Union address, a doggone packed house, that rarely happens. Congress does a lot of its business at the committee level, which we'll be talking about here shortly. The 27th Amendment to the Constitution is now another part of the Constitution that oversees congressional actions. Basically, all the 27th, that's the most recent amendment passed in 1992, all it said was that if Congress votes themselves a pay raise, that pay raise cannot go into effect until after the next congressional election. Makes sense. That makes sure that Congress doesn't give themselves a 20% pay raise and it takes effect next week while they're still in office. They should have to deal with the potential political fallout of some of that. There are several things that a congressperson enjoys. They can have staffs. 18 people can be hired as per their allocation. They also have something called franking privilege. Franking. That basically means they can mail anything they want to, and as much of it as they want to, and it is paid for by we the people, the taxpayers. Now, technically, they're not supposed to send campaign-related material, but they're going to send out an awful lot of stuff that brags on them and what they've been able to do in Congress and call it a newsletter. They'll just keeping my constituents informed. Another thing that Congress has done to, again, give themselves a little more accountability, in 1995, a new Republican majority was seated in the House and Senate. One of the first things they did was something that was very popular, and I cannot believe it hadn't been done before. A requirement that the members of Congress abide by the laws they pass. That seems like a no-brainer, right? Well, no, members of Congress were not part of the Social Security system that we were until 1984. Even until then, members of Congress that owned businesses didn't have to comply with certain parts of racial discrimination laws. You can see how that would definitely be abused. You cannot arrest a member of Congress while Congress is in session. And that applies to state legislatures as well. We had a member of the Virginia General Assembly get pulled over for drunk driving earlier this year, and he could not be arrested because the House at that time was in session. Now that's you'd see why they would want to do that, to prevent someone from saying, "Whoa, we got a big vote coming up, but man, these 3 people right here are going to vote against it, and that's going to kill it. Let's put them in jail. Yeah, let's do that." Well, the only time you can do something, arrest a member of Congress during a session, is if we're talking about high treason, felony, or breach of the peace, they call it. So they have certain protections in that respect. So we've already told you who Congress is and more or less what they do. Let's see how they go about it. Congress usually sees very little turnover in membership. We mentioned that the House of Representatives has to re-elect or is up for election every 2 years. And I said earlier that we kind of reshuffle the deck every year. Not really. There are huge, huge advantages to being an incumbent, that is, a sitting member of Congress, and you're running for re-election. And it shows 90% of incumbents who try to get reelected get reelected. Again, some of that has to do with gerrymandering. Remember the examples where Republicans draw safe seat for Republicans, Democrats draw safe seats for Democrats? That's a part of it. Also, name recognition. If you're a congressman, most of the people who live in your district are going to know your name. Now, that could be bad, but for the most part, it's good to have name recognition. The other thing about the process of making law, we're going to really go into that next week when we talk about how bills become a law. One of the things that we need to look at is what senators do apart from the just drawing up law. They are our representatives in Washington. So, in addition to writing and passing law, they also represent us. If I, as a citizen, have a problem with a federal agency, the Army, the VA, or whatever, one of the avenues I have for relief is to call my congressman's office and inform them. And most of the time, again, if your gripe is legitimate, the congressman will contact the federal agency and act as a go-between. So, in addition to just doing the legislative power, again, the congressmen are literally our representatives in the federal government. So, more than doing just laws, they are our mouthpiece. One other final thing in terms of operations of Congress, probably the best thing to come out of all this is the Library of Congress. An amazing success story. The Library of Congress was established in 1800 to serve as a library. Well, the War of 1812, the British steamed up the Potomac and set the doggone thing on fire, and we lost a lot of books. Well, the former president by the name of Thomas Jefferson offered to sell his collection of 6,000 books to the government. They did, and more people gave books. More people. It's like a big bookmobile. By 1870, they had to move out of their wing of the halls of Congress to build their own building. Today, the Library of Congress holds over 162 million items. And it's not all digital either. Their shelf space totals 838 miles. That's a lot of stuff. Pretty much, it is the go-to place for information. It is like if the internet could be touched in terms of information availability. The last little bit we're going to talk about in this lesson before we open things up again is really how the rubber meets the road in Congress, how things are done. And that is the committee structure. There are constitutional requirements for leadership positions, but the only one that's called for in the Constitution really is the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. As per the Constitution, the President of the Senate is the Vice President of the nation. So right now, Mike Pence is the President of the Senate. Now that sounds like an important job, but it's not. Matter of fact, as President of the Senate, according to the Constitution, you can't do anything unless there's a 20-20 tie vote, or a 50-50 tie vote, I should say. Then the President casts the tie-breaking vote. That's one of the things to keep in the back of your mind as we continue with this election season. A lot of people are trying to figure out, what is the Senate going to look like after all this is done? Right now, it's 51 Republicans, 49 Democrats. That's tight. If the Democrats get 51 to 49, then they are in the majority position in the Senate. If it's 50-50, though, that means the Vice President is going to determine who is the majority party in the Senate. Well, we have a presidential election this fall that will decide who the Vice President is going to be for the next 4 years. So yeah, that presidential election, as if it needed to be any more important, becomes a lot more important. Now, the idea that I've been mentioning, and let's drill this down a little bit. Republican, Democrats, Republican. We have a two-party system, but that is not by constitutional design. As a matter of fact, the Founding Fathers were very, very scared of factions forming. That is to say, a group of like-minded people joining a few more that like them, and they become a majority and begin dominating. That's why they built the Constitution with so many checks that it would be very hard to have that. One of the things, the way I like to describe it is, like in the Electoral College, instead of having the largest mob wins, it's the largest amalgamation or group of mobs scattered throughout 50 states. It's the best we can do. But the Founding Fathers were very, very distrustful of factions and what is a political party if not a faction of mostly like-minded people. There have been third parties that have cropped up on a very brief basis to challenge each other. But for the most part, we've had two parties. And the broad dividing line, again, it's so much more complex than this, but the broad dividing line is the party that wants central government to do more and the one that wants them to do a little less. One that's big on congressional federal rights, the other is big on states' rights. Again, it's much more nuanced than that, but that's one of the general dividing lines between the two-party system of what we have now, the Republicans and the Democrats. Again, the Speaker of the House is the only stated constitutional position in the House, but as this graphic shows you, we have an awful lot of other positions in the House of Representatives too that were not laid out specifically in the Constitution. The only required office is the Speaker of the House. But we have the majority leaders, you see here, committee chairs, the majority party, the Speaker, that is, who's always going to be from the majority party, assigns the committee chairmanships and members. So that's a lot of power, because he's going to make sure that the committees are going to have a few more of his party than the other guy's parties. And he's going to make sure that the chairman of that committee is a member of his party. Moving over to the Senate here, we'll go back to the graphic now. Again, the only two required offices in the Senate are the President of the Senate, that's the Vice President, also the President pro tem. Pro tempore is a Latin term, and that basically means the President pro tem is usually the most senior member of the majority party. Right now, it would be Chuck Grassley, a Republican from Iowa, who is the senior most Republican. Underneath that, though, you see majority leader. And the way it works out in the Senate, the majority leader is the one that has the most power. Right now, it's a gentleman named Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, and he's in the news a lot because that seat, the majority leader in the Senate, is very, very powerful. It is Mitch McConnell who appoints all the committee chairs in the Senate and directs the business of the Senate. Again, we've mentioned that the president of the Vice President of the United States, the only thing he does is break up ties. Now, the committee system is the system whereby most of the stuff in Congress is done. As you can see here, each house has a series of standing committees. There's a couple of joint committees as well, members of both the Senate and the House. But most of these fall under pretty self-explanatory guidelines. Now, the Speaker of the House decides what bills go where. If he's doing his job right or she's doing her job right, something dealing with agriculture is going to go to the Agriculture Committee and not the Foreign Relations Committee. But on occasion, he has sent speakers of the House and majority leaders of the Senate have sent bills to a committee that they think might be more friendly or more hostile, depending upon the Speaker's view of the bill. But for the most part, this isn't an issue. An agriculture bill is going to be brought before the House Agriculture Committee. Now, each of these committees also has subcommittees as well. And in the House, again, with 435 members, you can see why you would need a boatload of subcommittees to make sure everyone had at least one committee assignment. There are some committees, not all committees are created equal. The Senate Armed Services Committee works on military policy. That is a very important committee. The Senate Judiciary Committee is very important. Why? They interview the Supreme Court nominees, and they are going to be very much in the spotlight here in a couple of weeks. In the House of Representatives, the House Ways and Means Committee is the committee to be on because they draft the spending bills, and everybody wants the money. I hope that this has given you a good broad outline of how this works, and I want you to think about term limits. I want you to think about what we have discussed in this session. We'll talk about it more on Monday, but think about this. Term limits, yes or no? Would the founders have approved of that? Do you approve of that? Why? If you do not approve of that, why? We'll talk about that on Monday. Till then, enjoy yourselves. We'll see you soon.